Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the final act. This is Unit 4 for our Springboard. It's bittersweet because we know that it's the school year is coming to an end, but exciting because we're going to be learning something new for this unit, and I'm excited because at the end of the unit you will be creating monologues. So let's go ahead and get started and talking about the final act. So on page 255 of your Springboard books, if you have your books, you may go along with me, or you do have the PDF on Google Classroom that you could use. You want to look at 255 for this assignment. So the final act we're looking at here, a picture of the Bard of Avalon himself, William Shakespeare. If Shakespeare were alive today, he'd be about 456 years old or 54 years old, give or take a few years. I'm not really good at doing math in my head, but he'd be really old. He lived a long time ago, as you can tell, just looking at the way that he's dressed, his hairstyle, the whole shebang, right? No, we know that he had an interesting sense of style, didn't he? So Shakespeare, we know him for being a playwright. He has created many different plays, and a lot of plays you may or may not be familiar with: Romeo and Juliet, Taming of the Shrew, Hamlet, Macbeth, just to name a few. So we're not really going to be looking at the contents, but I do want to look at the goals. The first goal is to analyze and understand the relationships among setting, characterization, conflict, and plot. We've been doing that for the past 2 units. So just again, we're continuing with understanding setting and characterization and conflict and the plot and how they're all related together. We're going to be researching a drama from a different time period. Depending on how I separate you all, you will be looking at different Shakespearean dramas, and I'm excited for that. You will rehearse and present an engaging performance of a drama. That'll be at the end of the unit. And of course, you will revise for effective sentence variety. So we have to, throw the grammar in there to make sure that you are effectively revising. So looking at your academic vocabulary, I'm going to be switching kind of back and forth between your assignment just so you understand what you're supposed to do. So looking at your academic vocabulary of source, bibliography, evaluate, annotate. Your literary terms: rhythm, iambic pentameter, tableau, limerick, rhyme scheme, oral interpretation, inflection, rate, drama, free verse, and alliteration. For both the academic vocabulary and literary terms, you are going to create your QHT chart, and it's on pages 256 through 257 in your Springboard books. And again, just a reminder that you will sort out all of the literary and academic terms. So again, question is, if you don't know what this word means at all, you've never heard of it, or maybe you can pronounce it, but you just don't know what it means, you put it in the questionnaire column. Maybe you've heard the word before, but you're not certain of the definition, how it may be used in context. You put it in the H column, and then teach it. You know this word so well that you could teach it to one of your peers and it be correct. So sort those words in the QHT chart. Very quickly, just so you understand what to expect for this unit, I want you to look at making connections, and I'll read this out loud for right now. So far this year, you have read poetry, short stories, and other narratives, news articles, and informational texts, and historical letters. In this unit, you will encounter another historical text, scenes from one of William Shakespeare's comedies. In the first part of the unit, you will learn about Shakespeare and why his writing is still alive after more than 400 years. In the last part of the unit, you will study and perform a Shakespearean scene. So yes, you will. You will be performing and studying a Shakespearean scene. Like I said, I will divvy those out once we get to that. But you want to know why Shakespeare is probably the greatest playwrights of all time. And why, after, again, it's been over 400 years, why is his writing still so significant as of today? So we're going to be thinking about those questions as we're researching and understanding William Shakespeare. And it'll be exciting. He's a great playwright. So some questions just to ask yourself. You don't have to write these down. How can research shape one's understanding of a literary text? Why in the world would we be doing research on a literary text? I want you to think about that. And how is reading a text similar to and different from viewing and performing a text? Now, just thinking about this question, William Shakespeare, again, we know he lived over 400 years ago. So when we're thinking about 400 years ago, and not only that, he lived in Stratford upon Avon, England. And they spoke an entirely almost different sounding language. And even when he wrote his plays, things that he would say that might make sense to us in our context, the way we speak today, has an entirely different meaning from what he was actually trying to say. And I know those of you in theater have looked at some of these Shakespearean plays and can relate to what I'm saying. We look at it, we have no idea what it means, and then there's a book or there's an explanation for kind of a translation as to what Shakespeare was saying. So it makes sense to us. For the next activity, which is activity 4.2, Shakespeare in School. I would like you to read or listen, depending on if you have your Springboard Online account all set up, to the article on pages 259 through 260. You are going to mark in two different colors, or if you, again, don't have access to Springboard Online, you're going to write down pros and cons of Shakespeare's plays being dumbed down into comics for students. Please read it first before you start filling in the pros and cons chart for step 3. Looking at page 259, here are your learning targets. Create and write an argument, introducing and organizing claims clearly, supporting claims with clear reasons and relevant evidence, and demonstrating an understanding of the topic. You will not be participating in class debate. Sorry, I really wish we could. In the preview, it says, in this activity, you will read an article and participate in a class debate about teaching Shakespeare in school. You, again, will be marking the text in two different colors, and you can do that by your highlighting tool. So when you're highlighting in different colors, you may have the yellow here, and what you're going to have to do is you'll have to highlight the text first, and then you'll have to choose the colors. It won't do it unless you choose the colors. So maybe my pros are in yellow and then my cons are in purple, or whatever colors you may want to use. But that's basically what you'll be doing if you're using it on the Springboard Online. If you have the PDF version, then you may just have to write it down. If you have your actual Springboard book, then you're lucky. You can mark right in the text. So this is an article about Shakespeare being dumbed down into comic strips for bored pupils. So students, who are bored of reading Shakespeare. Shakespeare is hard to read. He's hard to understand. So, maybe seeing a visual of what's happening and using the terminology that we use today makes it a lot easier and maybe even more exciting to read at Shakespeare. And it really just depends on the person, of course. But Laura Clark is a British journalist. She is the education correspondent for the British newspaper Daily Mail. And so you can listen to it if you do not have the option. I'm going to turn up my computer here. I'm going to have you listen to Shakespeare Dumbed Down in Comic Strips for Bored Pupils by Laura Clark.
Shakespeare Dumbed Down in Comic Strips for Bored Pupils by Laura Clark. Shakespeare's plays are being rewritten as comic strips for pupils who find his poetry boring. It emerged today. Thousands of teenagers are to study cartoon versions of famous plays, such as Macbeth, which reduce finely crafted passages to snappy phrases. The publishers hope the comics, illustrated by artists who have worked on the Spider-Man series, will inspire disaffected readers with the love of the Bard's plays. But the Queen's English Society warned that dumbed-down versions could backfire by allowing pupils to avoid tackling the language and themes of the originals. The firm behind the initiative, Classical Comics, will launch its first comic book plays next term. They are targeted at older primary pupils and teenagers, and have already won the backing of the National Association for the Teaching of English. 3 versions of each play will be produced to help teachers cater to children of differing literacy abilities. The first uses Shakespeare's own words. The second translates them into plain English. And the third is a quick text version and uses as few words as possible. The firm hopes to print 10,000 copies of each version of its first comic play, Henry V. Macbeth should be ready next year, and there are also plans in the pipeline for Romeo and Juliet, as well as classic novels including Jane Eyre and Great Expectations. The firm hopes eventually to publish comic strip versions of all Shakespeare's plays. Dr. Bernard Lamb, chairman of the London branch of the Queen's English Society, said, "Pupils may just enjoy the cartoons and not connect it with Shakespeare, and they won't be much of a contribution to education. I am sure they are already well versed in cartoon characters and comic strips, so it would be good for them to get away from that and study something a bit more serious. A lot of the beauty of Shakespeare is in the language more than the plot." Dr. Lamb added, "There is so much dumbing down all around. Students are unaware of what language is appropriate in different circumstances. I have had students in degree exams using 8 for 8. But Clive Bryant, chairman of Classical Comics, insisted the shortened versions of his plays would give youngsters a leg up to enjoying the originals. We want to make Shakespeare as energetic and colorful as Spider-Man," he told the Times Educational Supplement. "Teachers tell us they are desperate for something exciting to use in the classroom. But if you ask kids about Shakespeare, the word they usually come back with is boring. We're trying to break down the barriers so they can get interested." Ian McNeely, director of the National Association for the Teaching of English, said, "This is a fun way of getting into the stories. Plays are not meant to be read, but to be seen. The illustrations in these books are an easy way of following what is going on. The genius of Shakespeare is in the language, but for some students, understanding it can be a struggle. It will be useful for teachers to have 3 different versions of the text." Source: www.dailymail.co.uk, August 17, 2007.
Well, after listening to that article, there are some pros and cons on both sides. We know that the author is not leaning more towards one than the other. So it was a pretty, unbiased article. So when listening or when reading and listening to the passage, afterwards, you can go back, of course. I want you to list the pros and cons, unbiased, not saying, okay, this is what you like or don't like about it. You'll be able to give your opinion in a little bit after you complete your assignment. So after you've listed your pros and cons, step 4, I want you to answer questions 3 through 6 on page 261. Please use a different color when you are adding your answer. I did put them here. And again, one sentence does not count as an answer. I have a lot of you just putting like a couple of words. That's not an answer. And please justify your evidence from the text, your answer with evidence from the text. And do not copy and paste. Copy and pasting is lazy, and it will result in points for your overall grade. I'm actually just going to give it a minimum 60 because you didn't put in the effort. So I won't put in the effort for grading. Okay. So we know I'm going to give you work for I'm going to give you the grade for the great work that you've completed, not the quick, fast, easy way that you completed work so you can get back to your video game or whatever it is that you're trying to complete in order to avoid my class. All right, ladies and gentlemen. So you'll complete questions 3 through 6, and I want to kind of go over number 6 with you. So After you have listed the pros and cons and you've answered the questions, you're going to use this exact frame below to support your side of the controversy. So we've just got done with talking about controversy for our last unit. So I want you to tell me if teachers should or should not expect students to read original versions of Shakespeare's plays, because now you're going to paraphrase 2 reasons from the text, and then you'll provide one based on your personal experience. So I know maybe you might not have read a version of Shakespeare's plays, but maybe thinking about what the article's talking about, is it going to be maybe better for you personally to be able to visually see what's happening in a comic strip and have the phrases and the terminology of the actual text, lack for a better term, dumbed down in order for you to understand it better? And then when you're paraphrasing the 2 reasons from the text, I'm going to scroll back up here. This is where the pros and cons come into play. If you are, for this happening, then you're going to look at the pros, and then you're going to paraphrase what was said in the article. You're going to put it in your own words. You're still going to, make sure that you're giving credit to the author, but you're putting it in your own words. And cons as well. If you find that this is not okay, again, paraphrase that in your claim. This is your claim. And then you're going to give me 3 reasons. Again, your reasons can also come from here, your pros and cons, or you can go back to the actual article and find some more information in order to support your claim. All right, that is your lesson for today and also for tomorrow. I'm going to give you 2 days so that way I make sure that I get quality work and that you're able to complete some assignments for my class and get some grades for it. Okay? If you have any questions, pop into office hours. Thank you for listening and enjoy your Mondays.